Good morning, everyone. While we wait for everyone to join, perhaps pop into the chat where you from and one goal for this morning. We will kick off in the next 3 minutes. So everyone's a bit shy this morning. So where is everyone from? Can you put your city or country? Oh, hello from the US. Welcome. Malawi, welcome. New Zealand, 9:02 p.m. Wow, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Dar, oh, beautiful Dar, welcome. Uzbekistan, wow. Oh, we have varied and amazing people from all over on different time zones. Doha, welcome. Ghana, hello. Sudan. It's nice to see so many people from the African continent joining as well. Cambodia. Middle East is strongly represented, which is great.
I was part of a recent survey by the EUC, and it shows that 67% of civil society organizations across 60 countries have been directly affected by the USAID funding decision.
We are living a time of uncertainty as a non-profit sector, and some of our organizations are actually facing existential threats.
I think it's actually a huge opportunity moment for the localization agenda, however we want to frame it.
NGOs, the churches, and other NPOs should be removed from this list. But also, it is pushing the country to now adopt a risk-based approach in targeting only high-risk NPOs in accordance to the FATF definition.
The FATF, which is the global body that sets standards for countries with respect to combating money laundering, financing of terrorism.
I don't think that being delisted means that it's time to get into a relaxed mode. No, that's not what it means.
Today we are blessed and honored to have the fine brains on the African continent.
Human resources are exploited along the way. Financial resources, of course, are exploited along the way.
We have this incredible wealth, if for some reason we also have some of the highest poverty statistics.
This is an international discourse, so it's a tripartite, not even a tripartite, but actually continental.
On behalf of the Civic Advisory Hub, I take the singular honor of welcoming you to this edition of the Leaders Talk.
Hello everyone, my name is Rekha, my surname is Ramprasad. I'm a financial crime compliance and ethics consultant. I am from beautiful South Africa. So a quick housekeeping rules. If you could please keep yourself muted, and the mics will open up in the end for a Q&A session. So we will definitely give you the opportunity to speak if you are willing to do so at the end. If you are participating in the Q&A session, I strongly urge you to keep your comments and questions brief so we can give as many people as possible to have a voice. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all for joining the Civic Advisory Hub, the Leaders Talk or TLT webinar series. It is a monthly webinar series, and I really encourage you to join the rest of them as they come up, because there's some exciting topics and speakers planned. Today, we are going to focus on understanding beneficial ownership. What is beneficial ownership? What it is not, and some key lessons from across Africa and other jurisdictions. We are going to focus on beneficial ownership. How do we deal with beneficial ownership? What effective implementation in terms of beneficial ownership looks like, and why do financial crimes persist despite the existence of beneficial ownership registries, and what can we do better as jurisdiction and the continent. We are honored to have two distinguished professionals with us today to help understand this complex topic and help us navigate it from both a practitioner's perspective as well as a regulator's perspective. So I think we have two excellent perspectives on this topic. So with that, I would like to say welcome to Anita Mankambo and Girish Malia. So please forgive me, I'm going to read their bios briefly. They have long and distinguished bios, and I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to quickly read their bios because it is worthy of listening to. So I will start with Anita. Anita Mankambo is a certified anti-money laundering specialist with over 20 years of combating financial crime. She's the founding director of the Compliance and Prevention Department of the Financial Intelligence Authority of Malawi, and is responsible for overseeing AML, CFT, and CFP supervision of financial institutions, as well as DNFPB, so designated non-financial professionals and businesses. Anita worked as an investigator and trainer for the Anti-Corruption Bureau for more than 11 years. Academically, she holds a Bachelor of Arts, Postgraduate Certificate in Financial Investigations, Postgraduate Certificate in Anti-Corruption, Collective Action, an MBA, and a Master's in Anti-Corruption Studies, so the MAX program. Anita believes that collective action is crucial in fighting financial crimes, as this fight is not a one organization and not a one-man show. Her favorite quote is from Helen Keller: "Alone we can do so little, and together we can do so much." I love that Helen Keller quote, Anita. Moving on to Girish Malia. Girish is a results-orientated learning and development professional for over 23 years of experience, backed by strong business and commercial acumen. Girish has developed and delivered training programs for one of the largest banks in the UAE, resulting in significant improvement in branch audit scores and sales, as well as reduction in fraud incidents and operational risk losses. He has been recognized 3 times by the Association for Talent Development Awards for building organizational learning culture, building performance improvement within organization, and enabling sales improvement. Girish has delivered training for over 10,000 banking and MSB professionals across 60 countries. He is passionate about motivating and enlightening university students to explore the fields of AML compliance and anti-financial crime. He has a law degree, certified anti-money laundering specialist, ACAMS, certified sanctions specialist by ACAMS, certified anti-money laundering expert by the India Forensic Organization, certified AML and KYC by the Indian Institute of Banking, and is a certified trainer as well as a certified ROI professional. So that's our 2 speakers. Before I introduce the topic, I am going to turn it over for a few opening remarks by Mr. Yona Wanjala from the Civic Advisory Hub. Yona, over to you. Welcome, Yona.
Yes, Reika, thank you for the opportunity and honor to give me an invitation to make a few remarks, but also to welcome our virtual panelists and virtual guests. Colleagues, good morning from the Pearl of Africa, Kampala. We are happy that you've taken time off your busy schedule to join us on our monthly webinar of the Leaders Talk Africa. This initiative by by Civic Advisory Hub wishes to bridge the knowledge gap on issues related to financial crimes. Colleagues from all over the world, I'm happy that you are joining these talks. The topic today is such a timely topic where the world is grappling with financial crimes. From the recent index report on crime index, mainly in Africa, we see an increase in financial crimes, money laundering, illicit financial flows, corruption, bribery, and Africa as a continent is losing close to over $800 million annually. And this puts the country in a shaky position. But why is this possible amidst all the mechanisms present, amidst all the MLCFT regimes globally? There must be vehicles that are hidden. There must be deficits in transparency, in exposing some of the vehicles that are used to channel money illicitly. So today, we are going to lift the veil in understanding what is beneficial ownership. What is it? What is it not? Who has implemented it rightly? What do we need to do to get to know the ultimate beneficial ownership as a way of joining the fight in financial crimes? We've been blessed to have good and experts in this area. One of our own, Anita Makambo, from the land of Malawi, who has very good experience in this area. Again, comrade and a friend, an expert in financial crimes, in fighting financial crime, Girish, who has joined us. But of course, with yet an experienced moderator, Reika. I do not want to eat a lot of your time, but I think let us give them a chance to explain to us, to reduce our ignorance on this subject, but key to it, to call action that we as experts need to do in the fight against financial crime. I declare this virtual engagement open. Thank you. Over to you.
Yona, thank you very much for that introduction and painting the picture as to why we are holding this webinar and also the importance of it. And, thank you for that, especially the call to action. So that is really appreciated and wise words indeed. Thank you. So the transparency of beneficial ownership has emerged as a universally adopted policy across different nations, right? Numerous international frameworks regarding transparency of beneficial ownership is an essential tool for combating illicit financial activities. These include the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, which focuses on anti-money laundering measures and counter-financing of terrorism. The OECD Global Forum on Tax Evasion, as well as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which seeks to address corruption. Combined with some really good operational initiatives like GLEAF, the Global Legal Identifier Foundation, as well as Open Ownership, have gained traction in implementing beneficial ownership registries. recently, over 100 jurisdictions have enacted legislation requiring the registration of beneficial ownership and mandating disclosure of identities of natural persons who ultimately own or control companies and other legal entities to the relevant government organization. However, money laundering, tax evasion, illicit financial flows still exist despite the existence of these frameworks, as well as beneficial ownership registries. Now, let's unpack this a little bit. Girish, I'd like to start with you, please. In terms of setting the scene, what is beneficial ownership? How is it different from legal ownership? And if you can give us one illustrative example, it would be great. How can we understand it in very simple terms, as if I'm a bank teller or an operational compliance person that needs to understand what is beneficial ownership?
First of all, thank you very much, Rekha, and very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. And thank you, Civic Advisory Hub, for inviting me. It's such a great pleasure to have wonderful people around here and talking and fighting financial crime. That's a very, very interesting topic, which I've been pursuing for many, many years now. So to answer to the question about what is beneficial owner, let me just take a couple of steps back and explain a few things. Well, we know that we have customers working in financial institutions. We have customers, and broadly, if you look at it, customers are classified into two categories. One is a natural person, that's the individuals, and we have legal entities. Okay, these are the two broad classifications, or general classifications, if I can tell you. Now, let's understand one more fact. I mean, these are the two basic classifications, and one more fact is that no business on this planet, with my limited knowledge, no business on this planet can create by itself. So we need the natural persons, that is individuals, like humans like you and me, to form a business. So one thing that is one of the facts that we need to understand, that business cannot form itself, but we have to start. That's individuals like us have to start a business. And one more fact, if I can add to that, no business on this planet can commit a crime. So that means to say there are individuals who are there, and these individuals start a business, and these individuals who are starting a business, they might be doing a crime using that particular business. So that's where these beneficial owners, rather, they take the benefit from that particular company. And that is how the word beneficial owner was coined. Now, who are these beneficial owners? Beneficial owners are people who are ultimately responsible for that particular company to take the benefits from that particular company. They are the real persons. They are the natural persons who are there. Now, they can hide behind, a company's complex structure. And that is where we financial institutions, we have to come into picture to find out who are the owners who are hiding behind these companies. So that's the basic idea which I can tell you about beneficial owner. They always have to be sometimes a human being, maybe sometimes a company also. We will be talking about that a little later. So this is a gist about who is or what is a beneficial owner. I hope I've answered your question, Rekha.
Yes, you have wonderfully, Girish. And staying with you before we move on, what would you say are the most common misconceptions professionals hold about beneficial ownership that they need to unlearn? So, for example, a legal owner is a beneficial owner, or a beneficial ownership registry solves all problems. Can you talk about these misconceptions which causes most harm in daily compliance work, from your broad experience? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes, or rather many times, I can say that, okay, we consider that, we identify the owner on a particular paper or a document, then we consider him as the owner. Actually, it may not be the truth. There are several misconceptions which we have. One of the things is that we consider that a person who is holding a certain percentage of shares, then we will be considering him as a beneficial owner. May not be true. A person who is actually legally on the papers, he might be considered as beneficial owners. Maybe it may not be true also, because and a person might be registered in maybe having a trade. His name is on the trade license, or maybe his name is in the memorandum of association or article of association, and we may consider him as a beneficial owner. He could be a straw owner. He could be someone who is a front person. Maybe the true owners are behind the scene. So even when I was talking about the percentage, we cannot completely rely on the percentage holding. Like many of the countries have got this 25% threshold. Some of the countries might have 10% thresholds, and so on and so forth, depending upon the local jurisdiction's laws. However, that may not be true, because there would be a control prong which might be there, and this control prong is to control the company, and he might not be having any legally or on paper, he might not be the owner of that. That could be one of the challenges which we might face. And there is another misconception which we may face, is that nominee shareholders. We assume that once we understand the nominee shareholders, we assume that it's the end of the story. But the reality is that often the nominee shareholders are internationally, they try to obscure themselves from beneficial owner. They don't want to come into identify themselves. There is another big challenge which we face or the misconception which we face is about the difference between UBOs, that is ultimate beneficial owners, and KYCs. Now, who are ultimate beneficial owners? As I mentioned to you earlier, no business can be formed by itself. It has to be always a human being has to be there to start. So an ultimate beneficial owner is always a human being. It cannot be a entity or a legal arrangement. It has to be a human being. So identifying the ultimate beneficial owner is not considered to be one of the factors. And that is where people think that, okay, I've done a KYC, and that is done. And that's the misconception which many of the financial institutions think, that, okay, once we have done the KYC of that particular institutions, they will not go dig deeper and find out who are the UBOs of that particular company. So these are some of the misconceptions, and the list can go on, Rekha.
Wonderful. Thank you, Girish. That really does, set the tone and helping us understand some of the key issues and differences between legal ownership and beneficial ownership. One of the key things I remember in my earlier days of being a practitioner, we used to call beneficial ownership the warm body test. Who at the end of it all is the warm body? Who's the person?
Yes.
So yes.
Absolutely
thank
right.
you.
Very well said.
Thank you. So before I move on to Anita, if I may ask the participants, if you have any questions, if you can pop it into the Q&A chat, Q&A, it would be great. We will try and address as many questions as we can. If you do have questions post the webinar, to please get in touch with the Civic Advisory Hub, and we will facilitate answering your questions, even post the webinar, because we do want you to get something out of this webinar and to clarify any misunderstandings or any concepts that you are having difficulty with. Anita, you have a long and illustrious career within the regulator, and I want to turn to the bigger, more strategic picture in terms of why we actually, identify beneficial ownership. So FATF sets global expectations on beneficial ownership, transparency, right? And in plain terms, what do the FATF recommendations expect from financial institutions and designated non-financial business and professionals, the DNFPBs, when it comes to beneficial ownership, from your experience? And also, if you could touch on a little bit, how do those expectations differ in practice for banks versus non-financial firms? It would be great. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you very much, Rekha. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. And thank you to Civic Advisory Hub for asking me to participate in this very important discussions and to share our experiences as a country. So yes, FATF has set the standards on how countries should best implement measures to prevent financial crimes, especially money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing. And in terms of issues relating to the beneficial ownership, then there's the recommendation 24 that talks on transparency of beneficial ownership in relation to legal persons. And we have recommendations 25 that talks of transparency of beneficial ownership in relation to legal arrangements such as trusts. Now, the expectations is that countries, first of all, need to have measures that require legal persons and legal arrangements to maintain information on their beneficial owners. And that is ultimately to identify the natural person or the ultimate ownership control of the entity. This information, I'm starting at country level, first of all, is that this information should be accessible to various authorities. Why is this so? Mainly because issues of beneficial ownership, I think they require a lot of coordination. For financial institutions, they are required to obtain information on the beneficial owners of their customers, and that information needs to be accurate and up to date, and it needs to be verified. Now, how do institutions obtain that information from their clients? Just relying on the clients can leave loopholes for them to say anything. So it means as countries, there's need also to have a central registry where the financial institutions or the DNFBPs can then verify the information that they have obtained from their clients or their customers. So this means then countries need to have the registries in place, and that information should be accessible not just to the financial institutions or the DNFBPs, but it should also be accessible to competent authorities, such as you're looking at the law enforcement agencies, you're talking of the financial intelligence units, among others. So they should have access to that information to allow them to carry out their investigations in a timely manner. But going back now to the financial institutions, there's a big difference between the financial institutions and the designated non-financial businesses and professions. Financial institutions often have systems in place and resources that can allow them to carry out an effective compliance program. On the other hand, many DNFBPs lack resources. They lack they lack the systems that would help them to get to comply effectively. So for financial institutions, they can easily, I mean, everybody wants to have a bank account, or many people can afford to have a bank account, and so they can get information, although it is a challenge for financial institutions to get that information from clients, especially clients such as politically exposed persons, as they feel you're asking for too much information is actually diving into their privacies too much. So financial institutions do face as well challenges. However, for designated non-financial businesses, many, for instance, in my country, there are 5 designated non-financial businesses and professions that we recognize. So the accountants, the lawyers, the real estate agents, the dealers in precious metals and stones, and the casinos. Now, let's take the casino, for example, say beneficial owner, or just even an ordinary identification. It's a challenge because nobody wants to be seen that they frequent a casino, for example. Real estate agents, many are actually a one-man business. So the same person owns the business the same person is engaging in activities related to buying and selling of property, and the same person has to abide to the MLCFT compliance rules. So they don't have that, they're thinking of maybe carrying out their business to earn a living, and then when they want to obtain beneficial ownership information, for example, in some cases, they may be asked to say, oh, you will have to pay. If for any information, identification or verification that needs to be done, you have to pay a certain fee. So those are some of the challenges, but the requirement is there that both financial institutions and DNFBPs should obtain beneficial ownership information and identify and verify their customers. Thank you.
Great response, Anita. Thank you for touching on verification, and thank you for touching on the challenges for the non-financial sector in this regard. But staying with you, Anita, can we talk a little bit about, so when a beneficial owner cannot be identified, or verified, what are the concrete steps a compliance team should take before proceeding with this relationship? So, when is refusal to onboard required versus enhanced monitoring or escalation to senior management? If you can touch on, where there are problems in identifying and verifying beneficial ownership on a practical level to compliance teams. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you very much for that one. So when an institution, be it a financial institution or when the DNFBP cannot identify the beneficial owner, there is a requirement that they need to escalate their customer due diligence. That is, they need now to conduct an enhanced due diligence on the customers. Another requirement is that they need now to assess the risk level and consider declining or terminating the business relationship. So the whole purpose is that they should not blindly proceed with the relationship where beneficial ownership is obscured. However, they need to conduct kind of like deeper inquiries into the ownership structures and the control mechanisms. So they can do this in many ways, such as requesting for additional information from the client. For example, they could ask for shareholder agreements, trust deeds, or board resolutions as part of that. In terms of the risk assessment itself, that is looking now into, say, where is the risk coming from? Is this information not available? Probably because there are complex legal structures involved, such as offshore structures, or is it that it is intentional concealment, or that there is no lack of cooperation from the client, or possibly is it that there's the jurisdictional opacity, for instance, where the company deals in safe havens. So all those things need to be conducted when taken into consideration as part of their risk assessment. And if still not, then they are encouraged to terminate the business relationship and not proceed. But first and foremost is that they have to carry out an enhanced due diligence, but also do their risk assessment. Depending on their risk appetite, then they will decide what to do. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for touching on all of those concepts, Anita. That was very helpful. So enhanced due diligence, additional information, complex legal structures, what should we be doing on a very practical level? That is super, super helpful. Girish, I want to come back to you. In respect of red flags, what would you say are the top red flags that suggest someone is trying to hide or disguise beneficial ownership? So if you can give some concrete examples and operational signs a compliance or onboarding person or team can look for? And, you know, these red flags, what are the most common red flags in say, for example, Africa, if you are aware of this, or in the Gulf states that you cover? Thank you.
Yes, so that's a very, very interesting question about red flags, and thank you so much for asking, because one thing is that the complex structure of the business. Now, let me just give you an example of a company, how it may be formed. Company A might be owned by Company B, and Company B might be owned by Company C. Now, the responsibility of the financial institution is to find out who is owning that Company C. So Company A, Company B, Company C. And that could be a legitimate business for all you know. But then our responsibility as financial institution, we have to dig deeper and find out who are the beneficial owners for all the companies. And that would be a bigger challenge. And that is multi-layered. I mean, when they are multi-layered, the complexity keeps increasing, and it could be about 3 layers, 4 layers, sometimes even more than that. So the complex structure is always one of the biggest challenges which we financial institutions which will be facing. And we need to find out also one of the other challenges or red flags which we may come across is that why are these unnecessary multi-layered complexity being created? Is it really required that we have to have multi-layered for that particular business? That could be one of the red flags also. Again, to find out one more red flag, if I can think of, is that a company may be formed in one jurisdictions. The owners might be from another jurisdictions. It might be registered in a third jurisdictions. The assets may be found in the fourth jurisdiction. So it is actually spread out, and we working in financial institutions, it becomes so very challenging for us as to understand various different jurisdictions complexity. And that is another red flag we need to find out as to why this particular big business is being spread out in different jurisdictions. Again, when we ask for certain documents, like Anita just mentioned, that we need to ask these documents, many a times it is being observed that either the person in charge or the person who's responsible to give these documents might not give documents when it is being asked, so that we can form or we can onboard that particular business. That is also one of the red flags which we identify. And one of the most important things is that there are frequent changes of directors. Business shareholders are frequently changed without any apparent reasons. No reasons given, but the reasons, and even the companies also change from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. Inconsistency and explaining of why these businesses are changing, or the business activity keeps changing. Okay, that's another red flag we can say. Using of offshore jurisdictions like secrecy havens, that is another red flags which we can think of. And of course, nominee shareholders, or who are not actually being there in the document, and yet they might be considered as the beneficial owners. So overall, if you look at it, if businesses who are unclear of the source of funds, or unclear of any documents, or unclear of any transparency which they have created. Anita rightly pointed out that FATF in recommendation 25 and 26 has clearly mentioned about transparency of beneficial owners. And somewhere I read that approximately only 9 to 10% of the countries are implementing this. That is a very shocking thing. Even I couldn't believe it, that 9 to 10% of the countries which are implementing this. So it is not only the country's responsibility. Countries actually give the responsibility to the financial institutions, and financial institutions. Who is financial institutions? It is us. We are the financial institutions. We are the people who are there in these financial institutions who have to abide by this. So these are the red flags you should know. You should understand these red flags, and only then we can find out whether the customer whom we are onboarding is a right person, or is trying to violate or using your systems for doing some illicit activity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive response, Girish. I'm going to turn this conversation a little bit towards a great question that was put into the chat by Patrick. And let's turn our attention to NGOs and NPOs and charities. And it is a complex enough topic for both Girish and Anita to put your views forward. Girish, I'm going to stay with you for the time being, and then we'll move to Anita. So, do NGOs and NPOs have do they have beneficial owners? And how would you deal with them when going through the identification and verification process? And how do regulators as well as compliance teams treat NPOs, NGOs, trusts, and charities? And what's the practice like in the UAE? And Anita, if you could, after Girish, give your views on this, because this is an important topic. Girish, over to you.
Yes, absolutely, yes, Rekha. It's one of the critical things where NGOs and NPOs are being misused by bad actors. And recommendation 8 has clearly mentioned that countries need to identify the beneficial owners and the structures. That's the definition which FATF has actually mentioned. And we have been seen, we have seen it in news, or we might have seen it in various different case studies. We have seen that the NGOs and NPOs are vulnerable because the structure involves, multiple actors, and they are actually could be trustees or settlers or donors, or beneficiaries who are giving money, and just donations have been taken. And these NGOs and NPOs have got public sentiment. And we see these mushrooming up or cropping up whenever we find that if there are any natural calamities happening, there's an earthquake or a flood, or some war which is happening, then these NGOs and NPOs crop up. But these could be misused. So for us, it is a big challenge to find out. Now, in UAE specific, if I can tell you something, they have actually identified, or they have mandated all the financial institutions, whenever you're onboarding NPOs and NGOs, you have to have a risk-based approach, of course, and you need to take a license verification from a ministry. That is a Ministry of Community Developers. You have to have that Ministry of Community Developers letter, and only then you can onboard the NGO or an NPO and do business transactions. They have also given some kind of a controls that we have to understand the NPOs or NGOs policies and internal procedures. We need to understand that, and we might have to discuss with them. There are regulatory reporting and obligations which are there with these NGOs. They have to do that. And sometimes what happens is that they might be operating through a remote locations or an opaque locations or jurisdictions which is unfamiliar for us. Okay, so these are some of the places which we might feel that that we might do some enhanced due diligence. So and when specifically, if you look at it, when there are social causes or when there is religion which is being added to that, that becomes more difficult for financial institutions to ask uncomfortable questions to these NGOs and NPOs. So we have to be transparent. We try to have a clear governance structure, and based on the governance structure, we need to actually take a clear understanding as to who is trying to run these NGOs and NPOs. And if there is a politically exposed person behind it, well, that's an icing on the cake. So it is becoming more and more complex, because if the politically exposed person is there, probably he might use his ill-gotten money into these NGOs, and he might be using it for his personal gains or personal benefits. So there are a lot of these cases which are there. Either it is NGO money is being siphoned off by people, or NGO money is being used for terrorist financing activities. There are a team number of cases. So we have to do a background verifications. We have to understand who the management is. We have to understand who are the field managers, who are the major donors are there, who are the beneficiaries are there. We need to do that so that we can identify or mitigate the risk factors on that. And then there is another part also, that the sanctions evasions also can come through these NGOs also. So long story short, if I can tell you, financial institutions must have internal policies controls and due diligence to measure that. And that is what UAE Central Bank is actually emphasizing on that. Financial institutions have to do a risk-based approach. In case if you think that your financial institution is unable to cope up with this, you don't have a risk appetite for onboarding a NGO or an NPO, maybe you don't want to do a business with them. So it has to be proportionate, it has to be ongoing, it has to be documented properly. And of course, the most important, you need to have the senior management's buy-in. And more than that, I would say, training plays an important role. So every staff in the organization, every staff in the financial institution should know what is an NGO, what is NPO, and what are the risks which that can bring to the financial institution. That is something which needs to be communicated as a part of the training needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish. Anita, you want to take the same question from a regulator perspective? It would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Girish, for explaining the detailed explanation. What I would add is, in terms of the NPOs, for instance, in my country, they are not reporting institutions under the Financial Crimes Act. So they're not under the same obligations as financial institutions and DNFBPs. However, because we recognize the critical role that they play in development, and also that they may be prone to abuse, there is a requirement to monitor how they operate. So when it comes to licensing or registration of an NPO, they have to follow the same requirements as any other legal person or arrangement. So they would have to provide details on the beneficial owners to the registering authorities. In terms of the financial institutions, just like what Girish has said, they are also required to obtain a certificate from the nonprofit organizations licensing body. So if that is not provided, then depending on their risk appetite, they are encouraged to perhaps terminate or not enter into a business relationship. Challenge, I think, with the NPOs is that there's really no clear ownership on the NPO. What you would have is the person that would register, but are they the legal owner or are they the beneficial owner? That's, I think, the biggest challenge that financial institutions face when it comes to business relationships with the NPOs. And as a result of that, it often slows down businesses, because then the financial institution has to request for other documentation, and there's back and forth before they can onboard them. And so there are those delays. But otherwise, in terms of NPOs registering or licensing, then the beneficial ownership information has to be provided. Thank you.
Awesome, Anita. Thank you. Thank you both for your responses. They're very helpful, very practical, very pragmatic. I want to quickly touch on the complexities of varying ownership thresholds between jurisdictions. And many of us operate or, have reason to operate with cross-border entities or entities that operate cross-border. With the ownership thresholds differing jurisdiction to jurisdiction, how should one manage this variation in dealing with global clients to maintain an effective and consistent risk posture? Girish, you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. Basel has actually defined the ownership structure for beneficial owner as 25%, and some jurisdictions, based on the risk rating of that particular country or the customer, they might bring it down to 10. So yeah, this is something which the intergovernmental bodies have mentioned it at a high level. Of course, we have to follow the local jurisdictions or local laws, whatever they say. But as Basil put it very clearly, that it should not be beyond the 25%. 25% is the threshold. So we have to do it. If you want to bring it down, then of course it is the local regulatory threshold can be identified, or it can be applied accordingly. So this is something which we have to do for identifying a beneficial owner of that. And of course, there should be internal policies, controls within the organizations, which is very, very critical. And every staff needs to understand as to how they need to calculate the beneficial owner, because when there is a complexity is there, the calculation goes a little beyond. When there are multi-layered structure, so understanding how the beneficial owner is calculated is to be taught or to be educated to the frontline team. And yeah, to add to that, maybe we are getting a little outside this particular topic, but that topic is also important, where if we identify a sanctioned individual who is one of the beneficial owner or one of the owners of it, then there is a separate calculation which a person needs to understand, because sanctions are now predominantly, if you look at it, most of the countries, or there are a lot of the sanctioned SDNs which are owning companies, and they will try to reduce their ownership structure in a particular business. So we might want to do that. So proper KYC, proper due diligence, and it should be an ongoing due diligence has to be there, because these structures keep changing. These structures can keep changing. So that's one of the things which we might face. And organizations need to be aware about what they are doing. That's something which I think is very, very, very critical.
Anita, I want to canvass your view on something. Do you recommend, would you say a global threshold in policy, or a jurisdictional overlay approach with regards to ownership thresholds is recommended? And actually, if I may ask the audience to put their views in the chat, would you recommend a single global threshold in policy or a jurisdictional overlay? Anita?
Thanks, Rekha. I think when maintaining when dealing across jurisdictions, each country, there are reasons why there's no one set rule, because countries differ. And differ in terms of their economic abilities, they differ in terms of the risks that are posed, and so on. So setting a threshold across all countries, I feel might be a bit challenging. However, that said, when it comes to cross multiple sources like jurisdictional thresholds, what is encouraged is that if the thresholds differ and transparency is unclear, there's need to escalate the decisions to the senior compliance officials. But not only that, if they differ, then institutions or countries are encouraged to go for the lower for the lower threshold. So, for example, if one country says 25% and another says 10% or 5%, go for the 5%, because by taking the 5%, you're actually covering all risks. It means you won't get into trouble with the one that says 25%, because you have mitigated against the risk. So the encouragement is to apply stricter standards and adopt the lower threshold among the relevant countries. This will ensure compliance everywhere.
I like that. Adopt the lowest common denominator across the jurisdictions that you are dealing with. Yeah. Girish, I want to turn to, thank you, Anita. So Girish, I want to turn to you quickly. In terms of resource constrained teams, what pragmatic measures can small resource constrained compliance team use to reliably detect beneficial ownership risks without large budgets, sophisticated tools, big teams? what are those small practical measures that, teams can implement when they are resource constrained?
Well, if I look at it in the first line, I think education would be very, very important. I'm talking about the first line of defense. Education would be very, very important to them to understand the various different terms, like, who's a beneficial owner, who's the ultimate beneficial owner, why do we need to find out about that? And of course, we spoke briefly, we spoke about NPOs, NGOs. What is an NPO? What is an NGO? We need to understand, the frontline team needs to understand that. Now, I personally believe that, passing on or educating staff would be one of the cheapest and the easiest way to, mitigate anything. And ongoing training is important. That's one of the 4 pillars as we know it. And of course, the senior management's approval or their guidance, where the culture of compliance comes into picture. The senior management needs to drive it. Now, the senior management, if they are not driving it, if the senior management do not have that culture of actually adopting the risk-based approach and not giving a free hand to the compliance team, then this can cause major damage to financial institutions. So a compliance professional should not be he should not be having business targets, nor he should not have pressure on himself. So these are some of the things I think which is there is no cost to that. I mean, you can have the most expensive software, but if someone is not using it, then it can actually bring out a major damage. So I strongly believe that the 3 points which operational risk consists of: there's a people, there's a process, and the technology. All the 3 things are in our control. You need to have good, knowledgeable people who are controlling or who knows about the subject. You should have a strong policies and procedures and control in place, where the first line of defense need to be implementing that. And of course, we need to have adequate or consistent technology, which is going to be there to support the policies and procedures and the people who are doing it. So these are basic 3 things I think we have to apply it. And I don't think it is expensive at all by putting these policy procedures and control into the system.
Thank you. Anita, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Girish has said it all. So nothing really to add from my end. He said it all. Thank you.
Awesome. Anita, from your perspective, from a technology tools, data sources, and operational changes, what are the biggest impact on actually implementing effective beneficial ownership requirements? And if you could touch on briefly, the implementation of beneficial ownership registry in Malawi, just very high level.
Okay, so in terms of Malawi, we have introduced a beneficial ownership registry, and that is managed by the Department of the Registrar General. So it's fairly new, as previously we did not have, and we have beneficial ownership covered by different pieces of legislation, such as the Financial Crimes Act touches on beneficial ownership and the requirement to identify a beneficial owner. And this act came into being in 2017. But our Companies Act has not touched on beneficial ownership. So it's an older law. However, in 2022, we came up with the Companies Act beneficial ownership regulations. So those touch on beneficial ownership, but mainly in relation to legal persons and not legal arrangements. So this piece of this means that now, in terms of the registry, it came into being in 2022, like I said, so it's fairly new. For entities that have been registering since 2022, beneficial ownership information is provided. But for those prior to 2022, it means we don't have the information. It's now being updated. And I would say, I think in terms of the registry, we are getting to a point where we would like law enforcement or other competent authorities to have access to that information. And this is ongoing. So I think the responsible department has started onboarding the competent authorities. As for the financial institutions and DNFBPs being given access to the registries, there is they don't have outright access, but can request for that information through the Department of the Registrar General's office, as well as the competent authorities. Currently, they also have to request for access, but measures are in place to allow some of them, maybe giving them user rights. I hope that answers your question, Reika.
Apologies for that, sticky controls. Absolutely, Anita, that is such a helpful answer. I want to turn the conversation back to Girish quickly. In terms of handling opaque structures, how do you escalate? And what are the operational controls one should implement around opaque structures and dealing with this? What are the complexities? What are the controls? What recommendations do you have?
Yeah, this is a wonderful question, and I think many of I was just looking through the chat, and somebody asked me this question also. I mean, somebody has put this question, not asked me specifically, has put this question also, as to what is a risk-based approach which can be applied for NGO or NPO. Okay, so I think it's a similar thing which I'm going to use here. Now, this challenge of opaque structure is very, very common. And financial institutions have to perform an enhanced due diligence and understand that. And to mitigate that, there is only a couple of things which I think I can think of. Is one of the is a strong compliance culture which has to be there, disseminated across the organization, and the importance of the compliance culture, that is importance of how compliance can play an important role, that has to be disseminated across the organizations. And if any of the financial institution follows the 4 pillars, that is having strong policy, procedures, and control, having a compliance culture which is being there, that is the appointment of a designated compliance officer, or if you look at the 3rd pillar, that is ongoing training and independent testing and auditing. I think if any of the financial institutions follow that, I think it is a brilliant way of mitigating many of the risks which is being there, and mitigating all the bad actors. Because one of the things which the sales professionals they are not aware about is the consequences. So I think it's a primary responsibility of making aware about the consequences to the frontline team as to how it can impact them, maybe their lives or their future, or maybe even their families, because if there is a punitive damage or if they are imprisoned. So keeping these things in mind, I think it is the best control we can do to have these bad actors coming into the system. I think that's the only thing which I can think of.
Thank you, Girish. That is a great answer. So we'll come to answering the questions in the chat in a minute. Before we move on to that, a lot of organizations rely on third parties for either identification, verification of beneficial ownership. What are best practices and what are the red lines around relying on intermediaries or third-party providers for beneficial ownership information? So, what controls you require when relying on third-party attestations, etc. Girish, can you cover this, quickly, and Anita as well from a regulator perspective, and then we'll move on to some of the questions.
So I can take that, and it's very simple. Risk cannot be transferred. So even if it's a third party who's onboarding a client for you, the responsibility of the quality of the product which the third party is being delivering it and onboarding, ultimate onboarding of the client or the customer is your responsibility. You as financial institution is responsibility. It is your responsibility to onboard the customer. So you definitely cannot say that, it is my agent who has brought this customer. So you can't transfer risk. Risk is not transferable. So I think that's the simple sentence which I can say even if you're onboarding or if you're having an agent who's bringing out accounts for you. Ultimate responsibility is yours. That's what I wanted to say.
Anita, do you have anything to add to that? Because there's a question I've been absolutely wanting to ask you, which I want to get to after this.
I think, like Girish has said it, risk cannot be transferred. Totally agree. And I think even in our law as well, it is ultimately the responsible of the reporting institution to ensure that they maintain the information and obtain that information when they're relying on third parties. Thanks.
So Anita, you have a wealth of information from a regulatory perspective. And I mean, I know the good work you have done across the continent and very grateful for it and to you. I want to talk about the common pitfalls, from an enforcement perspective. From your compliance oversight over the many years and interaction with other regulatory authorities, what are the most common pitfalls of failures you see when implementing beneficial ownership, programs, and can institutions practically fix this? What would be your top 3 things to say, go back, have a look, these are the things you can, address and implement and fix?
Thank you for that one, and thank you for recognizing the work we do. I think in terms of supervision, the biggest challenge that we faced is, yes, in terms of obtaining beneficial ownership information, but not just beneficial ownership information, but really just even basic KYC, especially for the DNFBPs. So information on the person's full name, for example. One of them would be the name, where people would use, instead of giving the full name Anita Mankambo, they would put A Mankambo. That can mean anybody. Or there would be AE Mankambo, but AE Mankambo is different from A Mankambo, and so on. So obtaining that basic information, we encourage them to say, go back, can you please get the full name? Another challenge, I think that is something common to the continent, is people would write the name the way they think they've heard it without verifying from the person what is the actual name. So again, giving an example myself, I get all sorts of names, ANNITA, NTA, H at the end. And so that again also changes the identity of the person. The name that I give and the name on my identification documents should match. So sometimes you get a mismatch and you're like, but this could be anybody. Yes, the face may look the same. That's one. Another challenge is when it comes to verification. Like I said, verification entails having other independent ways of verifying that source information. So if it means verifying a business certificate, for example, then they should verify with the central registry. Now, if the central registry doesn't have the information or doesn't have a registry in place, where are people expected to verify? Yeah. So that's another take, which requires then coordination and cooperation among agencies. I think another one is when it comes to beneficial ownership, not just from a supervision perspective, but at country level, is understanding who, when we talk of legal persons, who who is a legal person? When we talk of a legal arrangement, what is a legal arrangement? So understanding that will help you then identify other stakeholders that are key to this process. So you may have a registry, for example, that does the companies, but what about, so the registry would look at the companies, but what is your, for example, the civil aviation authorities, are they also obtaining beneficial ownership information? Are they verifying that information? What about those authorities responsible for vessels, ships and so on? Do they, boats and stuff, do they also obtain that information? And when a company is dealing in, maybe it's an aircraft vehicle, but they do have a bank account, will the financial institution require them to produce a certificate from the relevant authority, or they'll just look at the other sectors? So I think those are some of the pitfalls that then pull this issue of beneficial ownership backwards, because all competent authorities are not at the same level in their understanding of beneficial ownership. I think that's the take that I would give. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. I want to turn quickly to answer some of the questions that we've gotten online. I think, Anita, I would direct this at you first. So are financial intelligence institutions in many countries validating the beneficial owners information that are given by companies? I know it's complex, but there seems to be a lot of concealment of actual beneficial owners. This is from Paul from Uganda. Who wants to take that first?
Well, I could go first. In terms of like our country, it's the Department of the Registrar General that is responsible for obtaining beneficial ownership information. Of course, this relies on whoever is registering a company would keep whether they'll provide the information. But so far, the system that we have in place when it comes to registering, like I said, it came in 2022. That's when we have an online platform. The system will not allow a registration to go through unless the beneficial owner has actually been declared. So if the beneficial owner is not declared, the system will reject. So it will take you to another page where you have to ultimately provide information on the individual behind that company. That said, then in terms of the financial intelligence units or authority in our case, we do have a relationship with our Department for the Registrar General, but as to whether we then verify for each and every application, I think that relationship doesn't go that far. We'll rely on the Registrar General's information, and if there's a need, like maybe in the case of companies to do with procurement, and they get information on the procuring agency or the stakeholder can approach the FIU for information on to check on who the owners are at international level. I think that's where we're at. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if there are any other questions. Julie, do you want to identify whether we have any other questions, or is it just comments in the chat? So we do want to leave a little bit.
We do have a question, Rika. I just sent it to you directly.
Okay. How should multinational companies harmonize beneficial ownership compliance across different jurisdictions? Anita, I think you covered this, or was it Girish? You covered this. Can we quickly summarize?
What are the questions, sorry?
How should multinational companies harmonize beneficial ownership compliance across different jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think we have answered that question, but I can repeat that. That is, the threshold is always 25%, and even if it is anything about 25% threshold, I think we should follow that. That's the basic guidelines which is given by Basel Committee. Of course, your local jurisdictions should be applied. It has to be given priority. Plus, your enterprise-wide risk assessment, whatever you have done, that also needs to be kept in mind before you take a decision of what should be the threshold.
That's a great response, Girish. I actually want to point out, so just to jump in, South Africa, the threshold is actually 5%. So if you are dealing with South Africa as an entity in your global program, you probably will look at a minimum baseline if you're wanting to align 5%. Is that what you are suggesting, Girish?
Yes, absolutely right.
Absolutely. Fabulous. So I want to pose one final question, Girish, if you can answer this very high level, because I think, I would be remiss with your wealth of training, experience, and having you on this webinar. What are the 3 practical training points or behavior changes you would prioritize for frontline staff to improve beneficial ownership detection?
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. Okay, 3 practical points. What I would say is that one is business is not everything. Okay, I mean, that's where the frontline team always go for, is something which they might think that, okay, I will have to achieve my numbers. Now, achieving the numbers is easy, but it can be devastating for you. Second point, what I would want to say is that your compliance plays a very important role. In fact, I can give you a simple analogy or an example, which I always tell in my class. Maybe I think it would be interesting to the audience also. I always mention that, when you're driving an automatic car, you need to have 3 things in your control. Okay, I mean, I think that would be an answer to your question also, Rekha, is that first thing is the accelerator. Accelerator is something which the car is moving ahead. Okay, now without the accelerator, you can't move the car. Now, the most important thing, it's not the accelerator. The most important thing is the brake, because brake allows you to move the car at a great speed. Now, I give this example because in UAE, Dubai over here, the roads are, the minimum speed, some of the roads are, or the maximum speed is 120 or 140. So I give this example that, how can you drive at 140 kilometers per hour? Because you know that there is a brake in the car. Without the brake, you cannot drive. You cannot accelerate. Okay, you can't even ride a cycle. That's the second point. And then I also tell them that there's a third aspect which is there in the car, is the steering. So now if you don't have a steering wheel and you have an accelerator and a brake, again, you're not directed or you're not maneuvered. You cannot go to a direct direction, to the right direction. So to reach from point A to point B, maybe it is from your office to your house. So that place also, you have to use all these 3 things very, very carefully. Now, how am I applying it in your financial institution is that your accelerator is the business which takes the business ahead. Okay, and then comes the brake, which is the important part, which is the compliance team, which actually puts a brake into the system. And that the third one is the audit team, which directs whether the team is going into the right directions, whether the first line and the second line, they do it. I think these are all these 3 things are important. And I personally feel there is no other second or the third point, Rekha. This is the most important thing which we need to follow. And if we follow, any financial institution follows this, I think there is zero risk, or I can't say zero risk, of course, zero risk cannot be zero. We can bring down the risk to the greatest level. This is all I can say.
Wonderful. So to close off this conversation, before we open up the lines for live questions, Anita, this is my closing question to you. From a policy perspective, if you could recommend 3 or even your top 2 immediate high impact actions jurisdictions or large organizations should take to move their beneficial ownership policy to meaningful implementation, what would those be?
Thanks, Reka. I think first of all would be for jurisdictions to undertake their risk assessments in relation to legal persons and legal arrangements, and that assessment should include a thorough mapping of the legal persons and legal arrangements, as I've said, looking at what is a legal person, which entities fall within that definition, how are they created, what are the how long does it take to create them, where can the risk be, and all that. So the risk assessment is very key to that. And that risk assessment to involve relevant stakeholders, including representatives from the NPO sector, I think. Secondly, I would say for the public to be encouraged that when they are registering, they need to provide that beneficial ownership information. Oftentimes we get caught up in talking about this at law enforcement level, FIU level, but do we share that information? Is the public made aware that there's that requirement and why certain authorities may be requesting for that information? So those are things that I think are really key if we're to make headway. But also, lastly, a review of relevant laws. In our case, we have, like I said, the Companies Act itself has not touched on beneficial ownership, but we have the Companies Act beneficial ownership regulations. So it means we need to review the Companies Act itself so that it talks to these regulations. And then, like I said, this law emphasizes more on legal persons, but we haven't touched much on legal arrangements, and that is in the Trustees Incorporation Act. So we need to review that again, and so that issues of beneficial ownership are covered. But then other legal frameworks as well, like I said, in terms of, let's say, the legal framework governing civil aviation or aircrafts, or licensing of aircrafts, has that touched on beneficial ownership? What about vessels? Has that touched on beneficial ownership? What about the extractive industry? So stakeholder engagement, but also review of other laws so that they speak to the same matters. Thank you.
That is an excellent response, and it highlights the complexity of the matter we are dealing with. I really like the risk assessment being done in collaboration and not in isolation, and not, it's not done in a vacuum. So that's a great point. And then also there's an overall framework that needs to be considered and applied. So I love your response, Anita. Girish, in a minute, what would be those practical takeaways be for a compliance officer or a onboarding team member leaving the session? What are the concrete action they can take tomorrow to strengthen beneficial ownership controls in their organization? In a minute.
Yeah, I think we have to focus more on identifying, and doing proper due diligence of that particular client or your customer or your entity you're onboarding. And if when in doubt, or if you're having any doubt on that, please ask for more information. Asking for more information gets clarity. That is one thing. Escalate the matter to your senior management or your compliance officer. Have a doubt, clear that. Talk to your sanctions compliance officer and find out if there is anything which these people, there are common names which are there. If it is listed as a sanctioned entity or a sanctioned individuals, or maybe if he's come from a high-risk jurisdictions or a sanctioned jurisdictions, I think if it raises a red flag, you might want to raise up this matter. So basically, I think one of the critical things, if I have to tell it in one single sentence, you should know what the red flags are, what are the consequences are, and what it can impact you. These are some things which compliance associate needs to understand when they are onboarding, and that's how it can be mitigated. I don't see anything else other than that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your really comprehensive response, Girish. Can we open up, Julie, can we open up the line? I think we've answered the questions in the chat, and thank you all for your comments placed in the chat as well. Very helpful and insightful comments in the chat. Can we open up? Is there anybody, and if you could raise your hand, wanting to ask a question live? If not, we can move on to Julie for the closing. Any questions from our wonderful audience?
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I just have a quick comment. My name is Milimo Moyo. I have lived and worked in New York for the last 20 years, and I had a occasion to work with several banks, and also I contracted for the US Treasury, which allowed me to travel to different countries. So I've kind of seen this topic from many different perspectives, and I've really enjoyed listening to all of you. I'm grateful that Civic Advisory Hub and Yona invited me to this event. I liked the questions that you were posing, Rika, and also the responses from Girish and Anita. They were all very insightful. Thanks for that. I think this topic could not have come at a better time. I've actually been worried about all the African countries that have been placed on the gray list, because I've noticed that in almost every instance, almost all of them, this was an issue. I noticed Angola had the issue, Algeria, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, well, not Cameroon, but Cote d'Ivoire and Kenya. This was an issue, having access to timely and accurate beneficial ownership information. So I hope that you guys will make this recording available to a lot of African countries, because I see that even the ones that are coming up for assessment by the FATF, I think this is going to be one of the hot topics that they touch on. I just wanted to re-highlight what Anita said about the importance of regulatory agencies coordinating about this issue, because again, it's been pointed out by FATF as one of the deficiencies they've observed. So it's very important for authorities in any given country to coordinate and make sure they have a central registry for this information. I'm sad to say that the US suspended the requirement to report beneficial ownership under this current administration, because their policy is to deregulate as much as possible. So unfortunately, the US cannot be like the perfect example to other countries on how to implement a single registry of accurate beneficial ownership information. Most of the banks rely on Secretary of State websites that contain this information. It may not be accurate sometimes. So the US is unfortunately not the best example. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of re-highlight that point, because it's going to come up with the FATF over and over in coming months. Thank you again for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your helpful comments and highlighting the key issues. Appreciated. Do we have anyone else? We've got 2 minutes left, and I think if you have not posed your question, please can you get hold of Civic Advisory Hub or connect with Girish and Anita on LinkedIn and myself, and we can definitely help answer some of your questions offline. But it would be great to facilitate it through Civic Advisory Hub and Yona and Julie in this. That's number one. Number two, Julie, do you want to come on and close off our session? Thank you.
Thank you, Reka. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, or depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Julie Butinde. I do communications for the Civic Advisory Hub. The discussion has been very extensive, so I won't take too much of your time. I'll just want to say, first of all, thank you. Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Anita, for taking the time, for sharing your expertise with us and sharing your knowledge with us. We appreciate it very much. Reka, thank you so much, not just for the expert moderation, but you were with us during the planning and organizing the entire discussion. So I thank you very much, Reka. And finally, to everyone who joined us, we are very appreciative, all the participants. You constantly join us our engagements, and we are very appreciative. And I'm so happy that we ended. This is our last Leaders Talk webinar of the year, and I'm so grateful that we have ended on such a crucial topic and such a high note. And I'm very appreciative of all of you. So thank you so much, and please continue. You could always get in touch with us and let us know of other topics you would like us to discuss, or suggest people you would want to see or have a conversation with in the future. So if you can send those in early, we will be well prepared, and we'll have a very good lineup for you next year. Like Reka said, if you haven't been able, if your question hasn't been answered, I think we handled most of them. Please send them to us. I will share an email address in the chat that you can share your questions with. Our speakers have been very kind with their time and their knowledge, and they are willing to answer your questions even after we close this discussion. And it will be posted. We share clips of this on our socials, and we also share the entire recording on our YouTube channel. So please be sure to check that out. So thank you once again. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Girish, once again. Thank you, Anita and Reka, and everyone who's joined us this afternoon/morning/night for someone who was joining from New Zealand. Thank you so much. And I wish you all a great rest of the day or night. Thank you so much, Reka. Back to you.
Thank you, Julie. I want to say a huge thank you to Girish and Anita for selflessly sharing your knowledge and information. It is really appreciated. To the audience, thank you for joining from all over the world. What a great audience, and thank you for your helpful comments. And least but not last, but Civic Advisory Hub, Mr. Yona Wanjala and Julie, thank you very much for putting this timely conversation together, and thank you for facilitating this and helping especially the African continent come to terms with what beneficial ownership is.